Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited that everyone can join. My name is Matt Hoffman. I'm a partner at M13. I'm the head of talent, and I work with the companies in our portfolio to help them level up their people operations, which includes recruiting, includes technical operations, and of course, includes a topic near and dear to my heart, development. In my experience, both on the venture side and on the operating side, you actually cannot scale your company, no matter how strong your business is, without a focus on developing your team and helping them learn to grow as fast as the company is. So all the successful companies I've been a part of have had learning and development and people development as a core of what they do, specifically around coaching. And we're going to talk with some amazing people today about how that works. What does people development look like today? Jamie and Mento are going to share some findings from a really cool study they did, and then we'll talk about what that works and how you can apply some of those learnings to your own programs. So with me on the panel, we have Jamie, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of Mento. Mento is a coaching and mentorship company that helps leaders be exceptional at work. Prior to founding Mento, Jamie was a CMO at Jigsaw, which is an Alphabet-owned technology incubator, developing technology to keep activists, dissidents, and journalists safer online. Super cool, super important. We also have Margaret Bawani with us. Margaret's a people team leader and exec team member, coach and mentor with 20 years of experience across HR. So she's currently working as an HR consultant, a fractional CPO, and also a coach on the Mento platform. So in those roles, she's got a really deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities you're all facing in a business environment that's always changing and moving fast. She works with her clients and teams in aligning business and organizational goals with people's success to drive business success, including high-performing teams and engaged and motivated employees. And then last but not least, Carly Pierce is with us. Carly is an executive and team development focused leader. She's a practitioner coach with a spirit around holistically empowering people. Carly, like me, comes from an IO psychology background and has worked across industries to unlock potential, discover new insights, and authentically integrate people and business outcomes. Carly's currently working at Dropbox, where she supports leaders and teams to accelerate their own learning and effectiveness in emergent environments. So we have an awesome team together with a ton of really practical experience, and I know you're going to learn a lot from hearing with them. So let's stop hearing from me and talking to them. Jamie, let me start with you. In this new world of business, it feels like people development has kind of fallen off a cliff. We all know that hiring has slowed down, and certainly companies are kind of feeling that. But it feels like learning and people development has taken sort of a backseat in terms of importance to some other things around the business. And we all know that's actually not the case. You actually can't grow your organizations unless you're focusing on coaching and development. So in response to those environments, you and the team at Mento have done a study where you've actually reached out to many people leaders to kind of get a sense of like, what does people development look like in this new world? And I thought a good way to start this discussion would be kicking off with some of the things that you found in your studies, and then we in the panel can kind of dig in on kind of what that means and how we make the best of that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining. It's wonderful to be here with you all. Yeah, this was a really interesting study that we were able to kick off with over 100 people leaders from across the US. And just as Matt pointed out, we really wanted to understand what is actually going on. 2023 was a pretty brutal year in the state of people, not just for people leaders and people operations leaders, but also for the employers who no longer were receiving many of the benefits of people programs, as a lot of them were cut. And so we wanted to figure out, okay, there's a lot more hope and optimism. We're hearing that from our partners. And we also know through our own data that we've collected at Mento that managers are really struggling. So, there comes a time when you can only sort of do more with less for so long. And so what does this new world look like? What is the state of people development going to look like in 2020 before? And what did we learn last year? So a few really interesting insights and takeaways that we had were, people leaders did feel like they did a good job with what they had last year. They made the most of what they could, and they felt a lot of their initiatives were successful. Though we have a lot of questions on this panel of because there was a requirement, again, of having to do more with less. So that's things like on-the-job training. That's basically relying on your managers to then go train your other employees. So we know that's a very stretched thin community. And then, what is the downstream effect of that? Yes, that might have been effective for your ICs, but what does that do to your managers? And we see that in the results again and again of managers being burned out, wanting to leave, being really stressed out, overworked, burned out. And so that also then forward looks, kind of helps us look into the future, which is that the vast majority of people operations leaders and HR teams, they're really focused on managers as a segment to invest in this year, knowing that we probably underinvested last year. Things that were losing strategies that were reported were education and L&D stipends, more classroom-based sort of unpersonalized training. And one that's going to be a very juicy topic for us to dive into as well is around AI. So AI is both one of the things that didn't quite take off last year in the way that people probably imagined, but there's also the technology has grown by leaps and bounds over the past, few months, and a lot of companies now are incorporating it directly into existing platforms that they're already using. And so it's going to be really interesting to see more people just start using it and what that means for that strategy and how much people are going to get out of it in 2024. And I do think that this is going to be a very exciting year for AI and when it becomes a lot more mainstream, and most particularly the benefit that people can receive.
So I think that's super interesting. And I think one of the most interesting findings for me is that, at least from the reports in your study, almost 90% of leaders believe that their people development initiatives were successful last year, which is amazing, right? I think the
Yeah.
real challenge is, how do you get the support to do it in the first place? And the way
Mm,
that you get support for doing it in the first place is by demonstrating success and showing the return to the business. So
yeah.
Carla, I'll kind of start with you. When you think about, strategies that really work in your experience with our Dropbox or other places, what are the approaches that have really worked in showing that business impact that other people in this session can kind of learn from and build out when they're making their own case for supporting people development?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with a not sexy answer. It's know your customer. It's really about
Mhm.
what's happening in the business. What do they care about? What's keeping them up at night? What are the skills they're worried about? What are they thinking about today, tomorrow, a year from now, the 3-year roadmap? So it's really getting into that persona of who you're serving. And I think once you're able to do that, it becomes very clear it's HR second. So it's kind of what does the business need? What do the leaders need? What are the things that we can provide? They're really curated to meet them in the flow of work. I think we all know last year was like a year of a lot of anxiety, fear. It was a wild shit show, truthfully. This year is a bit more exciting. And
Yeah.
I think there's like a new embracing of opportunity. And I think that still remains the customer centricity of like, okay, we've braved the storm. There's more to come. The new normal is change persistent. So
Mhm.
how do we learn in the day to day to do things we need to do well, but also some delight thinking about just how human beings operate. Like you want to have that feeling of meaning, something that just like builds that curiosity. We know how important this is for resiliency as well. So it's really truthfully to boil it down, know the customer, build things that they can use that are not hard to use. And that looks a lot of different ways. It's coaching, it's async learning, it's reading an article at the right time, using automated tools to make that accessible and intelligent with how people are getting access to things. So it's really a scattershot. And I think this year we're looking at a lot of experiments of like, what is the makeup? And I think we're landing so far, it's like it's diverse and we're gonna keep experimenting. So sorry to bore everyone to start, but it's the
You
customer.
didn't bore me.
That's a
No
great
boring.
place to start. How about you, Margot? When you think about kind of programs like on-the-job training, learning platforms, certainly mentorship is relevant here. What to your experience kind of works, and how do you make it be successful from your own personal experience or others?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I didn't find what you said boring at all, Carly. I think super relevant and important. It's the customer. And so we can look at the customer as a group of people, or we can look at the customer as the individual learner. And I think what we need to do is shift, and I think that's starting to happen. I think there's much more attention that we can put on this to shift to looking at how different individuals learn, receive information, what their preferences are, and so having multiple sources is helpful, and I think really important to allow people a certain amount of room to choose their own journey. So we are providing a number of different ways of receiving information. We're going to guide you and support you through receiving that information and learning. We're going to be asking for your feedback and collecting data on how things are landing for you so that we can iterate as we need to. But most importantly, not everyone is going to want to only read the article. Not everyone is going to want to put all of their focus on a classroom training model. People want the one-on-one support. Going back to on the job training, really helpful, really effective, but it can be a drain on resources for managers. They've got work to do now. They're managing teams, they're managing pieces of the business, they're responsible for revenue, and now they're spending more time than is probably appropriate with on-the-job training and getting people ramped up. It's important, but how do we create a really well curated group of learning initiatives that everyone can relate to in their own way?
It feels like kind of on the job training is kind of what's working now, but as the field, as a process evolves, programs and functions around mentorship and coaching feels like the next evolution of that, right? So, Jamie, you obviously have a lot of experience with that. What are the things that make mentorship and coaching programs work, and how does that evolve from the training and the learning platforms that we're traditionally used to?
Yeah, well, very curious to hear what Carly and Margaret have to say on this topic. But it was, obviously we are a coaching and mentorship company, but we're also really happy. We're also happy to see. We promised that the survey was unbiased and they didn't know it was coming from us. But it was really great to see that coaching and mentorship considered a very successful initiative. And we were also excited to see, of course, as well, that people are going to be investing more in it this year. And I think absolutely to just what Carly and Margaret were saying, which is that there is a level of personalization that coaching and mentorship can give to your employees that is very hard to find elsewhere. And we know async is good for some people, article is good for some people, maybe a workshop here and there for some people, but where coaching and mentorship really shine is sort of this ongoing behavior change and performance improvements. And I think that also we're really seeing that as managers are, the market is really, leaders are seeing that we need to serve the market of managers. People ops leaders obviously know that this is important. This is nothing new to them. But as leaders are sort of catching up and saying, you know what, actually, like this is impacting our business a lot, because when managers aren't doing well, a lot of other people beneath them aren't doing well. People aren't staying around. Motivation is maybe lower. I see Jordan here left a comment on, how the change management of managers having to be managers and ICs because their teams are smaller. There's a lot that's being asked of managers. And I think that's where we're looking at right now, is that coaching and mentorship is really uniquely able to support those leaders, not just in the awareness of those skills and in the awareness of things that they need to work on, of like, I need to be an effective communicator. I need help, here's how I could manage someone through change and motivate this team and get them excited. But mentorship and coaching really enables you to kind of bridge that gap between awareness and application. And that's what companies are really focused on. And you could see that in the desires of HR leaders from this report, is that people are really focused on performance and outcomes. As Carly was mentioning, who is HR serving? They're serving like the C-suite, the leadership team, an individual. Maybe it's a product leader, the CEO, the CFO, absolutely, and also the manager population. And their job is to find solutions that work for both in terms of driving business and outcomes, and also are solutions that their teams actually want to use. It's not fun to do things that people don't want to use. So that's, I think, also a really exciting part of coaching and mentorship.
And that's kind of part of some of the trends we're seeing in the reorganization, is that organizations are getting a lot flatter, right? There's a real trend for kind of more efficiency, greater span of control, fewer layers of middle management, more leaders managing more people. And that's great, but like there's a limit to how much you can directly manage people and still get stuff done. So the idea around kind of a broader cultural approach to coaching and mentorship is not just something that a manager is, but something that you kind of spread out, is the only way to make those layers of efficiency work, right? What's been your experience, Carly, to James' question about like how this type of approach, obviously you've done things like this at Dropbox. What does mentorship look like? What does learning look like in the Dropbox environment, and how has that become successful?
Yeah, I think if we're especially talking about coaching and mentoring, there's all the flash and pizzazz around AI, technology, the cool tools. We live in a really just interesting, cool time in general. But there still is the human animal aspect where we want to connect with other human beings. And that's something we're seeing a lot. And when it comes to coaching, managers are not superhumans, they're just humans. So like having that space to be very tactical, personalized, focused, have space to process with someone else, a thought partner. We're seeing a lot of trends around that, kind of having more of that functional coaching, if you will, or kind of a blend of having more of like an advisory space that they maybe aren't getting elsewhere. There's also this world where they're having to really coach their own team. So there's almost like a skill ripple effect that we're thinking about when we're thinking about coaching. Comes from external coaches, comes from the internal things that we do as far as how we drive. Like, how do you really use a manager as a cultural ambassador for the things that matter most? Because they are the frontline drivers for a lot of the work that gets done. They set the tone for the team. They enable and the environment and the culture that happens there. So a lot of the learning that we're looking at is supporting managers, yes, because they can't do it all. Like we need to really meet them where they are, provide easy tools, think about things like that are self-serve, that are like very like, for lack of better terms, dummy proof. Like I can do this in 5 minutes and I know it's going to practically infect the team in a positive way. There's also more broader things around getting really close to teams. That unit's also important. You start with the manager, you ripple effect into the team. How do you support and understand how those cross-functional relationships look like? How does coaching factor into that? Team coaching is a big topic right now. We're kind of playing with that concept, what that would look like to really facilitate more influence, more productivity as far as how people relate and learn together, for those groups that really have to work together to make deadlines, to meet the mark in the products we're producing, really getting clear on the learning supporting the business outcomes, but also at the end of the day, it's people and results. And I think there's like a big come to Jesus moment happening this year around kind of, you can't drive so hard towards these deadlines and forget the people are the ones serving it. So it's really making sure you're shoring up that ship and the learning that provides them to feel competent and effective to do so. And then typically the research suggests you're going to see a high performing team. And that's kind of the angle we're taking with anything we're providing right now.
And then, so what are some things that maybe don't work as well? We think about, potential losing approaches or strategies maybe to probably deprioritize in 2024. Margaret, from your experience, what are some things that may have worked in the past, but are probably not going to work in a new environment, or maybe they're just better ways of doing things?
So I think sort of one directional, one size fits all. This is the approach that we're going to take across the organization. Just doesn't work, and I mean the evidence is very clear that it doesn't work. We going back to what Carly was saying. We're human beings. We have a desire to interact and to receive information in a way that is not only I can learn from this and I can grow from it, but also experientially, I can now go and take this out. I can go and take this out into my work. I can go and take this out into how I'm communicating with my team, how I'm managing my team if I'm a manager, how I'm managing up if I'm an individual contributor. So the one size fits all approach is no longer working. The go watch this video and come back and let us know if you have any questions isn't working. It's depersonalized. And I think a part of that is also the way it's being delivered, right? We were all in the office several years ago. It feels too long ago to remember, right? And we would gather in a room and maybe the training would be one directional, but we would have these personal
It would be
interactions.
like the office version stuff, right, from the TV show.
Right.
Everyone sits in a room and they have a workshop, and it
Right.
feels, it
Exactly.
wasn't that long ago,
And
but it feels like a lifetime ago.
it totally does. And then you're walking out, you're going to lunch with the colleagues that you just had this training with. Perhaps you've got a problem that you've got to solve and you're all sitting in a room together and it's like, oh, remember that we talked about this thing in the workshop. We have to iterate, and we have to catch up with, where we are and how we're interacting because it's so much different than we were. And I think we've sort of forgotten it's sort of selective memory loss, right? It's like, okay, well, let's try to do things the way we were doing them prior to us all being in front of screens and on Zoom, or we're spending maybe 75% of our time together virtually, and then we've got 25% of our time that we're spending in person. Well, that's not enough time to focus on everything that we need to focus on. So how do we create a really balanced approach? And if I could, I just want to go back to the coaching and mentoring topic, because I think it's really important to think about coaching and mentoring in terms of integration as well, right? So when I'm learning a new skill, when I'm challenged with a situation, and I'm receiving one-on-one mentorship or group coaching, I'm able to integrate what I've just learned with the situation that I've just been through and have it help me to address a situation or, work with something that's coming up. New technology, new teams, new ways of working. You need to be able to process that. And I love doing it. Carly, you had talked about group coaching and group mentoring. And that's really important as well, because then you solidify those sort of personal connections. And it's an opportunity to hear a diverse range of experiences and perspectives on how to now take this in to level up myself, not only where I'm at now in the workplace, with whatever the current issue of the day is or what I'm trying to solve for, but also for my own career development, because that's really important too. We can't, forget that we're all learning and growing and wanting to get better on a personal level.
So when we think about kind of these lessons of what's coming in 2024, there's no way you can get around the AI discussion, as Jamie mentioned. So let's kind of like dig into that now, right? When you think about AI and how that's going to transform the development space, the coaching space, kind of I'll start with you, Jamie. Like, what does it look like now? What can it do? What can it do? And then Carly and Margaret, like, I'd love your perspectives on where can it go in the future, right? So Jamie, share a little bit kind of where we are now, and then I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel about like where we think it's going for good or bad.
Yeah, so just a few stats coming out of this report was really interesting. So just as a reminder, people said that AI was a losing strategy last year, but 73% of people also said that they plan on investing in it this year, which is, I think, absolutely right, just in terms of where the technology was, probably a little early last year. And also there's a huge component around change management in terms of getting people comfortable with the idea of using AI. It's certainly been sort of a scary narrative of, AI is replacing my jobs. And now I think we're all starting to buy into this idea that, hey, it can actually help me get better at my job. Oh, wait, it can automate tasks for me that I actually have no desire to do. So also it's about freeing up time and space for people, because again, everyone is feeling overworked in this day and age. So very interesting to see where some trends are going. I think what's really interesting to see right now is that a lot of people are using it in terms of sort of functional productivity. This is for my sales team. They can now get AI transcripts. They can get auto suggestions on what they need to improve. That's great. For HR teams, hey, all this data that it took us, weeks to analyze, it's now done for us. Amazing benefits there. But I also think that there's a huge opportunity, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of where we're going with AI at work. I think there's going to be a future where we have some sort of companionship basically with AI, and it helps us getting better every single day. We have highly complex jobs. Every day, I'm sure something comes up in your day-to-day where you're like, I wonder how I should solve this. Okay, my team member just came to me and they said they had a personal issue come up. Okay, having an AI coach or mentor who knows you, who knows your context, who knows your personality, who maybe also has insight into your reports, you could workshop with them how to have that conversation and then actually go do it. I think it's less of like, okay, I know how I need to effectively communicate, but I don't know, like, I know I need to do this thing, but how you actually do it. And again, further bridging that gap is where I think AI is going to completely change work, the future of work and how we work together. As an aside, my whole view on work is that the reason why it's so complicated is that it's because it's people at the end of the day, and people are complex. And if we have more tools to help us be better every day at work, that is a net positive. And also where it's going to get very interesting is that AI, I think, will be able to also connect you to people at the right time when you need it. And that's where it's also going to strengthen the role of people. People are only going to get more valuable. You cannot replace AI with lived experience, at least right now. So I'm really excited to see these trends. I'm curious to hear what Carly and Margaret, what you two are doing and what you're seeing, and also, what you are optimistic about for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to like go gung ho on all the splashy new things, which
Yeah, of
we're all
course.
approaching it right now. It's like, be skeptical but playful, because I think there is also like this underlying skill that's really important for people to harness right now, is like comfort to change and complexity. Like
Yeah.
if you can get in that groove, figure that out for yourself, really embrace that. AI, whatever comes next, if there is a next,
Mhm.
who knows? Like we just don't know. So I think being comfortable and kind of like self as instrument in some of this complexity and change things is really where it starts for me. As far as the
Mhm.
actual tooling, I think there's amazing possibilities here for how we reinforce things, how we remove admin work. So folks like us can do more practitioner work, actually people to people work, the things that we really care about that make meaning, that go the distance versus another spreadsheet, or like having to find something quick, like collating summaries of themes, like whatever it is. I think there's just a lot of potential there for like removing the admin and letting people really unlock a creative facet for how we connect and help people learn and grow. But I also think it's really important to be skeptical still, because there's a lot of things that just they don't pass the Turing test. Like it's not human. It's a little alarming. It sets off psych safety. Like, is it actually
Mhm.
delivering value? Do we know? How do we
Yeah.
know? Like, there's a lot
Yeah.
of questions. I think there's a lot of curiosity to be had, and being open to it. But also, I think holding on to the fact that we're not human machines yet. So, like, it's kind of, where do you want to fall in that line? And how do you want to embrace it? And for us, it's a lot of experimentation, thinking about
Mhm.
how to use it for like reflective prompting, question asking, preparing for conversations, like some of the really basic things, but also like what else is there? So I think there's a lot of conversations we're having with all kinds of folks to see like what are people testing that they're not really comfortable sharing yet, and what could that look like, or how does that change the way we think about really providing things to people to just be better people at the end of the day. That's where we're at in a nutshell.
Mhm.
I completely agree with that. I think for me right now, what AI is a supplement, right? And I think that that will grow and develop as we learn more about it and we learn more together. I love what you said, Carly, about psych safety, because that's a real thing. There are many of us who are still really uncomfortable with the overall general concept of AI. And I know you had talked about, job safety, is this gonna take my job? And I think we're kind of getting over these hurdles, but at the same time, it's so new to so many people. Fear comes up for many people as well. So it's like, how do we, we're not putting all of our eggs in the AI basket, but we're taking very measured, thoughtful steps into incorporating. And I think, the amount of tasks that can be automated, in particular for people in the people ops world, right? So we have been inundated over the last several years with software. Like
Mhm.
what do you have in your HR stack right now? I didn't even hear the term HR stack until just a few years ago, right? And so now we've got HR stack. So we've got this system talking to that system. We've got to pull data from here and pull data from there. So I think for me, a good place to start is to say, okay, what can we automate? How can we get data faster? How can we use the information that we have to show our leaders, to show our employee populations, hey, here's what's working. Let's keep doing this. Here's what's not working. Here's working. It's working, but it's working a little differently than we thought it would. And really taking the opportunity to learn from this technology that's out there, while at the same time, I think really important is being transparent about how we're using it, what we're using it for, and what the results for are, because I think that's what's going to get people more and more comfortable with the approach and with integrating AI more and more into what we're doing. And so I don't think we dive in the deep end. I think we take a measured approach, not from a place of fear, but like, let's see what we can do here. How can we work with this? How can this benefit everyone? And how can we utilize these tools to help us get back to, because I think a lot of us are missing that real people to people connection, right? Where I can be fully focused on how I'm communicating with my team, on, what the needs are, on solving problems in the people space. And then I'm not spending 50% of my time trying to figure out spreadsheets and HR data.
One thing too that I'm seeing and hearing in conversations, like most companies, we're also exploring AI. And one thing that's actually very interesting is I think it will also open up the opportunity for people to participate and get more support. Because one, obviously, there's an obvious thing around scale, of course, and that you can support more people, especially when combined with humans. And especially a large group of managers and on a consistent basis. But one thing also too that is that it might also open people up to the idea of getting human support as well, and human coaching and mentoring and other sort of connections, even having conversations. I was just talking to an HR leader at Transform last week, and she was saying, I know all my managers have a ton of questions, and I think sometimes they just don't want to be viewed as a problem manager. So they don't ask HR. And I'm not sure that they're going to their colleagues for help because we're a fully remote company. Right. So it's not like a water cooler, like, hey, are you seeing this with your report? Or hey, can we just talk about that? And so what kind of support? To me, that's like a great moment where maybe a conversation, there's a guided flow with AI that can help you come to work out sort of a problem, and then maybe say, hey, maybe you should connect with this person, or this could be a good person for you to connect with. So opening up that door. And so I also wonder the opportunity and possibility, and completely agreed, of course, that AI is not a panacea for all of our problems at work. And obviously we are a coaching and mentoring company, so we believe deeply in the value of humans. You can't replace it, at least not yet, at least probably not in our lifetimes. And I hope we don't replace people, because we are very valuable and have a lot to give to one another. But I do think that's also a really interesting sort of question that I have. Is that true? Is that not true? What kind of support and engagement might we see if there are multimodals, and also steps that people could take that's more guided for them?
Yeah, it's such an important analogy. There's such a trend to use AI to replace people for efficiency reasons or productivity reasons or whatnot, but it actually cannot do that. What AI can do is make your existing people better, and that applies to a number of areas, but it certainly applies to kind of learning and development. It can provide really helpful, co-pilot guidance, framework, structure, process. It can make the parts where you're actually connecting to human much better, because you're kind of removing that low value work and letting kind of the artificial intelligence do that work, but it doesn't replace it. It's really, really, really helpful around that. I see we have a couple of questions. We're going to get to them. I really do encourage everyone to please keep posting them in there. It makes so much for a lively discussion. So outside of AI, for you, Carly, for you, Margaret, what are some of the priorities that you're seeing your teams focus on beyond that? What is the people development space look like in 2024, and where do you continue to see the investment growing, or hopefully even growing?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to learning being continuous and communal. Knowing the world we're operating in, the tools, all things swirling around, there's the need for having things when you need them. So like us enabling that access, whatever that looks like, whether it is you drop into like a pod coaching session, a learning circle, maybe it is an e-learning course if you're so inclined. But also being really thoughtful about the fact that hybrid, virtual first, Dropbox, we're virtual first. So it's like being thoughtful about those moments in time where you want to feel like you're learning with other people. So a lot of our focus is going around like, how do we collate those experiences, those structures, those resources to create that environment for people to just show up and learn together, and keeping it practical. People do not want theoretical frameworks right now. They really want practical scenarios. This is what I'm dealing with. This is what's grappling around me. How do I apply something right now? And how do I know it's working? And I want to talk about it again with people that are experiencing similar issues, so I can learn from them. And then we can continue to have that community aspect where I feel supported, especially in virtual and hybrid, because you're not seeing people at the water cooler, like Margaret was mentioning. It's really around like, how do you create the space to learn? Because we want to learn, and make sure the content is like directly applicable to the job. And maybe a little sprinkling of delight or fun, because I do think there is that's still that magical component of human beings. So wanting kind of that kindergarten mindset of like, I'm learning something new with people that are also learning something new. So for us, a lot of the focus is about enabling easy in the flow of work, experimentation, but also just anything we do needs to be continuous and communal to meet anyone where they are, because it's going to change throughout the year. And I think the best practices still remain. People still want some of those big special experiences where we do get it in person for like a 2-day intensive, but being really thoughtful about where does that play well? What are you covering? What's the output? What happens afterwards? And then how do you sprinkle it in really throughout the entire biz rhythm of the year, versus having like seasons of change? I know like career development days was like a big thing, like years past. We'd like a couple times a year you had these events. That's just not really what we're seeing now. It's more like I want to learn all the time and I want it to be applicable. So if you can give me that in these various modalities, I'm happy. And we're also just iterating. I think we've really moved away from kind of like a seasonal evaluation, piloting, kind of like getting our strategy together. It's more sprint methodology where we're kind of quarter by quarter, sometimes month by month, experimenting, trialing things, getting close to our customers, playing around, like get in the lab with us. Like it's very much more around kind of learning together versus being stiff, kind of having something you roll out. Here's the menu. The menu's changing. The special of the day might be something different tomorrow. So that's kind of our approach currently.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think it's really, what I'm hearing from my clients is a model for continuous learning and development every day, every moment within our organization that is not separate, that is not um, uh, distracting attention from the day-to-day needs of what people are, trying to address and needing to address, right? So I think it's evolving that learning and development culture and also using that learning and development culture to create social culture, right? Or to further develop social culture and, you know, giving people more and more opportunity to interact and to work together and learn at the same time, because the community aspect of it is so important. How do we, and then also giving people time, right? So how do we, now we've learned something new, there's something new coming up where we're embarking on a new business development area that's going to be really impactful to our business. Okay, so we're learning this together, we're taking it out into the world. How are we reconnecting and coming back to it and saying, okay, this is what our learnings are, and then evolving our learning development strategies around that, and giving people that concept. We're curious beings. We want to continue to learn. We ask why a lot, and if the answer to why is because that's the way it's done, we're doing things the wrong way. So I think, as people professionals, we also have to be really, really listening all the time and really being honest with ourselves about what's working. And, I love this start, stop, continue model, right? So it's like, start doing this. This isn't working. Stop doing this. Continue doing this because it's really great, and really diving into that and supporting our organization from top to bottom. And I will say, I want to add, training isn't just, I think sometimes we think about learning and development for entry level and mid level and new managers. Training should be for learning and development should be for the entire organization. Everyone should be learning all of the time. And that's how we continue to create community. That's how we continue to grow organizations and, continue to drive home the fact that these business goals and what we're trying to achieve, going back to what we started with, I think you said it, Carly, the people success goals have to be tied to the business success goals. There's a direct correlation here, and I think everybody needs to be reminded of that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and ultimately, to kind of wrap things up before we move to kind of full Q&A, it all comes down to making the business better, making the people better. That's why you do this. You want to have the individuals in your team scale with the success of the business. And are really to start with the success of the manager. Despite more efficient teams, despite more panic control, the managers are are primarily responsible for charged with helping their people get better. So what does that look like to you all? What does kind of manager development look like in 2024? What are the most important things managers should be thinking about? What are the most important things managers should be doing? And what are the most important things companies should be doing to support their managers?
You wanted us to tackle that
With,
any direction? I feel like I could talk for about 45.
go for it. Let's do it. We got 20 minutes. Take all the time you need.
Yeah, I think it starts with just like the managers themselves, that resiliency, that self-care, that kind of putting your own mask on first. Like there's something around acknowledging like you're also experiencing all this change. You're also navigating a lot. You have an awesome responsibility. You're still a person. So there's something around kind of enabling that emotional intelligence. And I am seeing a trend, and I think probably a lot of us are seeing a trend. Folks that maybe in the past were like, oh, it's a little out there for me. Now they're like, oh, this is an emotional intelligence thing. Like, what does that look like? How do I do it better? Like, I need this. Like, there's just more of like coming back to being a, oddly enough, humanity through this AI revolution of thinking like, how do you be resilient? Great. Now how do I focus on the business so that I have myself, my team in order to like really go after things and do so in a way that feels sustainable. So I think that resiliency piece is really the thing right now. And enabling learning that doesn't feel hefty. Like it needs to kind of be the thing that like, it's there. It's part of my usual day, part of my usual rhythm. The topics are what we're really focused on as a broader business. So it's all tied together. So things are marching in one direction. So it's not feeling like a moment in time. It's just in time with all the other things that are happening around you. So it's really that resiliency, the practicality, the alignment of people in business, and having variety of options for people. And I also think just my big thing for everything right now is like, I'm listening, because I think there's going to be things we just don't know right now. They're going to emerge throughout this year. They're going to shift what we provide. So that's the angle I'm taking. I think it's going to change probably about 60 more times for the end of the year, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think for managers in particular, there's so much pressure, and yeah, the need for resilience is getting stronger and stronger. And you know, a place for managers to be able to ask questions, to know that it is safe to ask questions, to know that they don't have to know it all. You know, communities of support to, you know, even in some cases, maybe even just commiserate and say, well, here's a challenge that I'm having. How's everyone else dealing with it? Or is this coming up for you too? I think one of the things that sort of has happened is that managers may have the impression that they're expected to just fix it. Like you shouldn't have to go and ask for help unless you've tried to fix it and it didn't work. Right. And it's like, well, no, you can ask for help before. And this is where the AI conversation comes in, and like having access to tools where it's, what are some different things that I can experiment with and try with my team? What are some different ways of communicating and leading? A big part of this is also giving managers more time and space. Like how much are we asking them or expecting them to do this individual contributor work, right? That number seems to creep up further and further and further. And then what happens is it's like, okay, well now I now have to go and work on this problem, but I've also got this deadline for this thing that I'm having to complete by a certain time. It's like we really need to give managers more space to feel into, this is what you were saying about the humanity side of it, to feel into and get comfortable with being in these leadership roles and leading others and guiding others. And if we're shrinking that, we're not doing a service to our managers, and our managers are the front line, right? They're driving the success of the organization. So creating that space, continuing to create that space.
Yeah, I think this is going to be such an interesting year, because there was like the great pullback of 2023. Now we're having a reawakening of 2024, but things aren't at, you know, sort of 2022 investment levels. People are getting their budgets back, is what we're seeing in kind of across the cohort of companies that we work with, but it's still smaller than what it was. But there's more focus on prioritizing and investing in targeted populations that really need support, managers, but also a lot of director level, which maybe have also gone neglected. I think we kind of think about, oh, you know, directors, VPs, they got to figure it out, but that's also a group that has been underserved as well, not just sort of these frontline managers. And so I think that's going to be really, really interesting to kind of see what happens. But also there is a lot of pressure. A lot of companies we talk to, they're like, okay, performance, OKRs. And so we're kind of at this interesting intersection because we're both coaching of, you know, that's mindsets, beliefs, behaviors, developing deeper awareness, and mentorship of sort of skills development, workshopping, and getting performance oriented and working with an expert in your role or field that's actually done it before. So we kind of see it from both sides. And it, you know, there is a huge performance conversation still happening. There still is going to be a lot of pressure on people this year because economic and other trends, especially for those in VC and other tech ecosystems, to perform. And so as Carly and Margaret were saying, how can you kind of bring these things together so that it getting better every day and feeling like people have the support to actually do that? I think that's what this year is going to be all about, and actually trying new things. We are not going to be investing in managers as we were, or you know, any sort of population. So I think this is almost like a year of redefinition of like, how can we do things better and differently and build on what has worked, but also just the world has changed so much. So of the environments that we work in, which is why I do think there is a lot of optimism, but also couched like in the realities that we are working in stretch businesses that have a lot to prove this year.
Awesome. We have a question from Elliot. Thank you all for putting some in. Please keep going. Around a really important topic, which is career development. And what Elliot's saying is that a lot of people on their team is looking to be much more transparent around career pathways, what growth looks like within a department, across the department. Is that stuff you're seeing as well? And if so, how would you address teams? How would you recommend that teams address this concern or this question?
I think I'll start to kick us off, but like I think it just depends how people are thinking about career development, because there's the promotion outset. There's also like what experiences or skills am I trying to gain? Some of the trends that I'm saying, I think probably more broadly this group's also saying, is skill development. It's more focused on like maybe not next role, we're the next like 5 skills that I'm really interested in, like maybe there's roles attached to it that I'm exploring. It's much more fluid. So I think there's something around tapping into, maybe you have a role in mind, but like what are the skills you want to build? If you're thinking about kind of providing more opportunity for folks, they're like singularly focused on zeroing out on something, like expand it a bit. Think about the skills, the opportunities, the exposure, even like the informational interviews. I feel like those are so underutilized. It's very old school, but there's something around kind of like walking in other shoes to kind of get a feel for things, and just some of these old school things that still work. But I think the future is probably more around skills. So think about your career development, like what's the skills you want to add to your arsenal, and like what roles might fall into that as well. Just gives more options too. Because I think career development, it's less the ladder now. I think we've all heard the rock climbing wall or whatever fun metaphor you want to use. It's really about kind of gearing yourself up to be able to do many things. So that's kind of the way I think about it. I think it's been helpful for my own development too, to think about the skills that I want to gain.
Yeah, totally. And it's the skills development of, what are you proficient in? What do you need to master? What is mastery? And what I'll share is, so I tend to work with much smaller clients, younger organizations. And what I see is these things don't exist yet in a lot of ways. So it's like, well, what are the career development paths? Well, we haven't created them yet, so we don't know. So I think a big challenge for many organizations this year is going to be, because these questions are coming up more and more. Transparency is, at the forefront for so many things in so many ways, in all size businesses and all industries. Right. So before we go out and say, well, this is what a career path looks like, we have to know, we have to have that developed, and we have to have a plan for it. So I think, to start with, let's evaluate what's out there now. Let's work with our, managers, department heads, and teams to, for a lot of organizations, develop what these roles look like. And that it doesn't have to be just the one path, to kind of to what you were saying, right? There's growth with IC roles. Not all, we've been saying this for years, not all growth has to be leadership and management roles. Okay, so how do we facilitate that growth? How do we keep people engaged? How do we keep them challenged so that they continue to learn, and give them multiple pathways? And there's a lot of opportunity for businesses here. I think it's a missed opportunity in a lot of cases.
Okay. So I don't see any more questions from the chat, and here's one last call for it. But I guess as we kind of wrap up in the last few minutes, I'd love to hear from each of you. Like, if there's only one thing that you want people in this session to focus on, what would be the most important takeaway for, oh, wait, I take that back. Here's one more question before we go to that one. Thanks, Rob. So Rob has a question around kind of how AI works within the coaching process. Is it a framework? Is it a tool? Does it prompt experimentation? But how do you see the balance of AI and humans interface across coaching? And Jamie, I'll obviously start with you, but I'd love Carly and Margaret to weigh in on this one too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's going to be such a complementary component. I think there's this idea where an AI coach can support you in the day-to-day, and help you answer more basic questions, or help you just self-coach around a problem. Like, hey, I need to have this like difficult, I need to give feedback to my report. We know that that's like one of the, every quarter we see this as like the lowest rated manager skill that managers rate themselves on. Everyone struggles with giving and receiving feedback. So imagine instead you have an AI coach. Hey, you've talked to your coach about this issue. You've come up with some strategy and tactics that are specific to you. And then you can work with AI who has that context, with an AI coach that has that context about that's taken from your coaching conversations, the context of your company, what you've been doing with this person. And now you actually can just workshop that and say, hey, like, I want some help actually workshopping that. And then maybe you then go into that, you actually have that conversation because you feel prepared and supported and confident, and you basically like got some practice, got some reps in. We don't really have anything like that right now. Even coaching, which is fabulous, maybe you're doing it every other week and you got that great advice from your coach, but like, how do you then go implement it? You're feeling ready, then the conversation comes, or maybe you got some new insight and you don't have time to talk to your coach beforehand. Like, the pace of work is just so rapid. And so that's where I think the interplay can be. And then the coach also then can see, oh, this is, what, my member's been doing. This is the progress they made. Now we can build on that conversation. So you get a lot more continuous loops, which I think unlocks faster growth cycles and better performance and faster skills development, which I think has been like a clear takeaway for me for this panel as a listener as well, is that it's ongoing, it's continuous, and it needs to be contextualized and personalized in a moment, not in a once a quarter or even once every other week, just at the rate of change. And that's where it's sort of this implementation partner that I think is really exciting.
Mhm.
I would completely agree with that, Jamie. And you know what my coach has said to me for years, and it's embedded in my brain, is practice makes the master, right?
Yeah.
Practice makes the master. And I think AI is a really good tool to get that practice in, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And from an accountability perspective as well, you know, so I think the answer to your question from my perspective, Rob, is all of the above. In some way or another, and I think that'll continue to grow and evolve and iterate as we, you know, learn the capabilities and as we become more comfortable and as we partner. And this is, I think, as beneficial for us as coaches as it is for our coachees and our clients.
Yeah, and just plus one to all of that. And I really just see it more right now as a reflection preparation tool. I think that's what's really good at. What else it can do, TBD.
All right, I will now finish up the questions since we're wrapping up. You've got about a minute each to answer this, but if there's one thing that you would say, really keep an eye on this, or make sure you do this, or focus on for the remainder of 2024 into 25, what would that be?
How you
Anyone
use the
can
word
start.
complexity. What's really
Okay.
complex, what's complicated, and how are you talking about those things across your team, across the people you're serving, just being really thoughtful about where you put your energy around what you can control versus what you can't, and how you're resourcing around that. I just think there's so much around just like, again, that human animal aspect that I love talking about. It's about kind of making sure that you have that health, that sustainability, that longevity to really approach and attack things. And I think if you're starting from that place of really thinking about like what's complicated, what's complex, how am I splitting my energy on both of those things? And is it working for me? Is it, you know, having an effect I want? Am I experimenting appropriately? That's a good place to start because we are in a very interesting time where there's a lot happening. There's innovation. There's things we just don't know yet. So being comfortable with that and just making sure you're controlling what you can control and being thoughtful around that complexity and complicated terminology, I think is a big one that we're taking away. And I would highly recommend that to anyone, truthfully, living on Earth right now.
All right. How about you, Margaret?
I think listening is you know, the big brand. I think, you know, we tend to get in our own kind of, you know, people and culture kind of thought bubbles, and you know, we're reflecting to each other what we know. I think we need to go out to our constituents more and more and more. Like, these are our the communities that we're working within, our customers, to use Carly's words. That's what our employee populations are, right? So asking questions: what's working, what's not working, gathering feedback, iterating off of that feedback, and implementing what people need by listening to their needs.
I love both of those. Yeah, I love this question. I think it's humans and technology. We are at a world where in a time of world, and hopefully will always be one, where it's not just about needing both, but both actually get stronger together. And I think that's what's exciting about what's ahead. I think they've been in really kind of two distinct realms, and now we're seeing them come closer together. And so what does that open up? And so I encourage and hope to learn from everyone that's here of how they're experimenting, of what happens, like what happens, what are the potential outcomes, and what are the outcomes if you're able to experiment and actually test what more of these interactions look like, and how does that actually help people, how does that help you, how does that help your organization. That's what I'm really excited to see more of this year, and I'll be really curious. I am hearing, Carly, that I can't go too hard on the AI because we can be cautiously optimistic, but it's a fun time to experiment. I think people teams have actually the space to experiment, which they probably didn't have in quite the same way last year. And so there is some boldness around experimentation and learning, and I'm really excited to be a participant and learn from all of you as well in the space. So thank you all.
So this sounds like a great place to leave it. I appreciate all the panels. I appreciate all the audience and their active participation. I believe we're going to record this if anyone's available. I know Mento is going to send out a copy of the report for anyone on this call or anyone else who's interested. Thanks everyone for participating. This was a great session. I hope you all got as much out of it as I did. Thanks everyone for participating.
Thank you all.